Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Julia Osman. I am the director for the Institute for the Humanities here at Mississippi State University, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to tonight's event in which poet and writer in residence Ross Gay will share some of his poems, essays, and answer your questions, which, if you do have questions, you can write them in the comments section under this video, and we'll be sure to ask them on your behalf. Also, I'd like to let you know that Friendly City Books, located in downtown Columbus, will be carrying signed copies of Ross Gay's books starting next week if you're interested in purchasing them. And then before we get started, I would like to thank several people and institutions that made this possible. So first, I would like to thank the College of Arts and Sciences at Mississippi State for their support of this program, as well as the Department of English, especially Dr. Shaylin Claggett, who initiated the Writer in Residence program, and Dr. Katie Pierce, who is hosting tonight's event with me. Finally, I would like to note that this project was made possible by a grant from the Mississippi Humanities Council through support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And they have asked me to remind you that any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Mississippi Humanities Council. Last thing, please note that in the chat area under this video, there is a link to a short survey, and I ask that you take about 1 minute to fill out that survey at the conclusion of this program. Since this program is online, we cannot see who is here and we cannot hear your applause, and this will help us gauge who is here and what you enjoyed about tonight's event. So with no further ado, I'll turn things over to Dr. Katie Pierce, a professor of creative writing in the English department, and also our current poet laureate for the state of Mississippi, and she will introduce our guest. Katie?
Thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. We are so glad that you have joined us and are going to share this evening with us. So it is my absolute pleasure to be welcoming Ross Gay to Mississippi State as our Institute for the Humanities virtual writer in residence. Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry, Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, Bee Holding, and Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, which won the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. His collection of essays, The Book of Delights, was released by Algonquin Books in 2019. He's also the co-author with Amy Nzukumatatel of the chapbook Lace and Pyrite, Letters from Two Gardens, in addition to being co-author with Rose Chard Werenberg of the chapbook River. He's a founding editor of the online sports magazine Some Call It Ballin', in addition to being an editor with the chapbook presses Q Avenue and Ledge Mule Press. Ross is a founding board member of the Bloomington Community Orchard, a nonprofit free fruit for all food justice and joy project. He's received fellowships from Cave Canem, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation, and he teaches at Indiana University. Obviously, it's safe to say that Ross Gay is a person of many talents, and perhaps even more rare, a person of many curiosities. This curiosity, this open-hearted interest in and rigorous questioning of the world around us is at the heart of his poems and his essays, and is one of the many qualities that makes his work so generous and complex and so utterly compelling. In talking with my students this week about his poetry collection, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, I began grasping for the language to describe the way that Ross Gay is able in his poems to look carefully at so many facets of our world all at once. I couldn't hit on the right word, so I found myself making one up, something that felt especially apt given Ross Gay's own proclivity for language play and invention. The word I heard myself saying was alongsideness. In Ross Gay's work, nothing is diminished. Everything, a fig, an ant, the buzz of desire, grief's vastness, the tender exactitude of buttoning a shirt, is rendered fully and richly. Nothing is less than. Everything exists right there together, in his work as in the world. Like the gardens he writes about, Ross Gay's work is full of bounty and loss, bloom and rot, cycles both natural and devastatingly human-made. His work invites us into these gardens, gives us space to mourn, and exhorts us to celebrate every green unfurling of joy. I'm so grateful for Ross Gay's work, which helps me to welcome and feel welcomed by the alongsideness of the world. And I'm so thrilled that we get to welcome him to Mississippi State this week. Welcome, Ross, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was beautiful. I love that word, alongsideness. That's that's a great word. Yeah, thank you so much. And Julia, thank you too. It's good to be with you all. Um, yeah, I'm just glad to be here. I'm reading from Indiana where I live, and I'm going to read for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have a Q&A. And I think I'll probably kind of go back and forth um, between poems and essays. But I thought I'd start with this poem. And this is a poem about a kind of a real event in my life where I was walking down the street in Philadelphia, where I lived for many years. I kind of grew up right outside of Philadelphia. And I stumbled upon this sort of activity going on. There was a fig tree growing in Philadelphia. Fig trees are more like, appropriate in Mississippi. That's kind of more where you might expect them to thrive. This was a thriving fig tree up in the north. And there was just tons of people around it. And I don't want you to miss it. The person whose place it was where the fig tree was growing was outside sweeping up the figs because there was so many. It was wild. To the fig tree on 9th and Christian. Tumbling through the city in my mind without once looking up the racket and the lugwork, probably rehearsing some stupid thing I said or did, some crime or other. The city, they say, is a lonely place until, yes, the sound of sweeping and a woman, yes, with a broom beneath which you are now to the canopy of a fig, its arms pulling the September sun to it. And she has a hose too, and so works hard rinsing and scrubbing the walk, lest some poor sod slip on the silk of a fig and break his hip and not probably reach over to gobble up the perpetrator. The light catches the veins in her hands when I ask about the tree. They flutter in the air, and she says, "Take as much as you can. Please help me." So I load my pockets and mouth, and she points to the step ladder against the wall to mean take more. But I was without a sack, so my meager plunder would have to suffice. And an old woman whom gravity was pulling into the earth loosed one from a low-slung branch, and its eye wept like hers, while she dabbed her eye with a kerchief as she cleaved the fig with what remained of her teeth. And soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it, pointing like it's a constellation. Do you see it? And I am tall, and so good for these things. And a bald man even told me so when I grabbed 3 or 4 for him, reaching into the giddy throngs of yellow jackets, Sugarstone, which he only pointed to, smiling and rubbing his stomach. I mean, he was really rubbing his stomach like there was a baby in there. It was hot. His head shone while he offered recipes to the group using words which I couldn't understand. And besides, I was a little tipsy on the dance of the velvety heart rolling in my mouth, pulling me down and down into the oldest countries of my body, where I ate my first fig from the hand of a man who escaped his country by swimming through the night and maybe never said more than 5 words to me at once, but he gave me figs. And a man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. "Come here, baby," he says, and blows a kiss to the tree, which everyone knows cannot grow this far north, being Mediterranean and favoring the rocky, sun-baked soils of Jordan and Sicily. But no one told the fig tree or the immigrants. There is a way the fig tree grows in groves. It wants, it seems, to hold us. Yes, I'm anthropomorphizing, goddammit. I have twice in the last 30 seconds rubbed my sweaty forearm into someone else's sweaty shoulder, gleeful, eating out of each other's hands on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most which has murdered its own people. This is true. We are feeding each other from a tree at the corner of Christian and 9th. Strangers, maybe never again. I want to read this first poem from my first book. I think it was actually the last poem that I wrote for this book, but first poem from this first book called "Two Bikers Embrace on Broad Street." It's another Philadelphia poem. And I'm talking about a town, I mean, a street that kind of runs right through Philadelphia, north to south, called Broad Street. You probably have a Broad Street in your town. And the bikers I'm talking about, two bikers embrace on Broad Street. These are like Harley guys. Maybe since you're something like me, you too would have nearly driven into oncoming traffic for gawking at the clutch between these two men on Broad Street in front of the hospital, which would not stop. Each man's face is so deeply buried in the other's neck, these men not my guests to be fucked with. Squeezing through that first porous layer of the body into the heat beneath. Maybe you too would have nearly driven over 3 pedestrians as your head swiveled to lock on their lock, their burly fingers squeezing the air from the angels on the backs of their denim jackets, which reminds you the 1,000,001 secrets exchanged in nearly the last class between your father and his brother, during which the hospital's chatter and rattle somehow fell silent in deference to the untranslatable song between them. And just as that clasp endured through what felt like the gradual lengthening of shadows and the emergence of once cocooned things and continues to this day, so too did I float unaware of the 3,000-pound machine in my hands, drifting through a stoplight while I gawked at their ceaseless cleave going deeper and deeper still, so that Broad Street from Fairmount to the Parkway reeked of the honey-scented wind pushed from the hummingbirds now hovering above these two men, sweetening somehow the air until nectar, yes, it was nectar gathering at the corners of my mouth like sun-colored spittle, the steel vehicle now a lost memory as I joined the fire-breasted birds in listening to air exchanged between these two men who are themselves listening forever to the muscled contours of the other's neck, all of us still listening, as if we had nothing to blow up, as if we had nothing to kill. This is called Heart to Heart. So just for those of you who don't know, I have this book called The Book of Delights. And it's a book where, you know, the way it came to be, was that I was having a delightful day one day. And I mean, it was really delightful. I was doing like an artist residency. I was basically just being put up, housed, and fed in a castle in Italy. And it was a sunny day, you know, like sunflowers all the way this way, like, you know, just beautifully fragrant mown fields. You know, there were like honeybees everywhere, like all the beautiful things. And I thought, oh, I'm going to write a little essay about this feeling of delight. And then very quickly, a kind of voice came in my head and said, do it every day for a year. Write an essay every day for a year about something that delights you. And so that's what this book is. I didn't do it every single day, but I did it most days. And there were 3 rules that I gave myself. The first one was to do it every day, which I broke on day 4 or something. The second one was to write them by hand, which I never broke, I don't think. And the third one was to do them quickly, right? I wrote them all. I drafted them all in 30 minutes, which I did. And so they have a kind of diaristic, like a diary. They're daily, a dailiness. And an alongsideness, I think, I hope. Heart to heart. I like to think of myself as fairly capable. I know how to plant a tree. I'm a good hauler. I can spot edible plants most anywhere I go. Passable hammer skills, sufficient typist, keyboardist, not bad dancer. For the most part, I manage to do my job pretty okay. Interruptive delight. One of our great translators taught at my university for decades and retired a few years before I arrived. His advice to his younger colleague, who was my older colleague, and offered me the story not as advice, was to be such a bumbling clusterfuck, my translation, on his next committee assignment that he would never be invited again, which is another kind of capable, I suppose. Not to mention, I have been blessed with a fair amount of athleticism. some of which was bestowed upon me by my ma and pa, and some of which I have cultivated by hacky sacking, ollieing, etc. And so it surprised me that when I went to hug my friend Michael, yes, another hugging delight, and his arm position was such that my arm position was not going to work. His left arm was up and his right was down, whereas my right was up and left down. And I inelegantly shifted my arm position to left up, right down. I nearly sprained my ankle going in for the hug like this. So flummoxed, so off kilter was I. The delight is something about the exposure, the alert of a physical and emotional rigidity. For adjusting hugs should not, I would think, be difficult for me, especially as I am well practiced at deferring or demurring in the hugging department. I try to be a submissive this way. Not always, but sometimes. In part, probably because of my size, which, as you know by now, is in the large-ish ballpark. And I don't want to be that guy. I can't stand that guy. My first encounter with this particular brand of flummoxment happened with my friend Aaron, who, in addition to inventing the very best jokes, always hugs left cheek to left cheek, as opposed to right. Something to do with lining up the hearts, something space age like that, he told me. The first time he aggressed me so, I tweaked my neck, for his heart to heart is uncompromising. And long hugging Aaron, I now know if I don't want to get hurt, I better lead with my heart. Let me do this. This is called inefficiency. Second one, inefficiency. I don't know if it's the time I've spent in the garden. Spent, an interesting word, which is somehow an exercise in supreme attentiveness, staring into the oregano blooms, wending through the lowest branches of the gumi bush and the big vascular leaves of the rhubarb. And also an exercise in supreme inattention or distraction, I should say, or fleeting intense attentions, I should say, or intense fleeting attentions. Did I mention the hummingbird hovering there with its green gold breasts shimmering, slipping its needle nose in the zinnia and zoom? Mention the pokeweed berries dangling like jewelry from a flapper mid-step? Mention the little black jewels of deer scat and the deer-shaped depressions in the grass and red clover in my yard? Uh-oh. I come from people for whom, as I write this, lounging, sipping coffee, listening to the oatmeal talking in the pot, inefficiency was not mostly an option, I suppose, given being kind of broke and hustling to stay afloat with 2 kids in a car always breaking and their own paper routes on top of their jobs and such, does not so much afford the delight of inefficiency. Though being broke and hustling to stay afloat most certainly occasions other, mostly undelightful inefficiencies, such as my father driving from Philadelphia to Youngstown, Ohio, every single year to re-register his car in a state where they didn't have inspections because his 1978 Toyota Corolla, in my mind, one of the most beautiful cars ever made, the wagon, I mean, had 2 doors that did not open and a hole in the floor that was more or less, and a hole in the floor, and it was more or less a lattice work of rust. For instance, I love not getting the groceries in from the car in one trip. Or better yet, I love walking around a city, ostensibly trying to get somewhere, perhaps without all the time in the world, perhaps with, and despite the omniscient machine in my pocket frying my sperm, vibrating to remind me of said frying, just wandering. Maybe it's down this street. Maybe it's down this one. Maybe you're with a friend and maybe the inefficiency will make you closer. Maybe it's a cafe you're looking for. Maybe it's Cambridge Street, which evidently doesn't exist until drifting along, it does. And right down this block, across the street from a school where a trio of kids, black girl with braids, brown girl in hijab, and a white girl with pigtails, are shooting hoops. In one of my recurring dreams, I'm hurrying somewhere, trying to be efficient, to an airport or work, and just up the road, always up a hill and often around a bend, feels like parts of Pittsburgh or San Francisco, or sometimes very clearly Philadelphia, is a restaurant with the best veggie burger and French fries. The fries are thick, very crispy, naturally have the skins on, and are creamy inside. The veggie burger holds together. It's handmade, probably with about 6 ingredients, including the spices. The roll, superb. The decor, who knows? I should remind you that I have never actually been there. I should also let you know that when my partner, Stephanie, opened her exquisite vegetarian cafe, Pulp, the dream subsided. I got lots of those veggie burgers for real cheap. And the week before she sold it, boom, the dreams came back in force. And there I go, past the turnoff to the veggie burger on the hill, zoom, being efficient, zoom, getting something important done, zoom, being productive, zoom, and just up the hill and around the bend waits a simple delight, a slow and abiding delight, the passing of which usually only gets me to an airport where, in the dream, I almost always miss my flight. And if I don't, the plane will probably fall from the sky. I want to read this one to you. This is called Poem to My Child, If Ever You Shall Be. And it's after the poet Steve Scafidi, beautiful poet Steve Scafidi, who lives up in West Virginia. And it kind of invokes, I think there's a famous poet named Galway Kinnell, and there's a poem of his, I think called Little Sleep's Head or something like that. That this is also in kind of, I think, pulling into it. Poem to my child, if ever you shall be. The way the universe sat waiting to become, quietly, in the nether of space and time, you too remain some cellular snuggle dangling between my legs, curled in the warm swim of my mostly quietest self. If you come to be, and who knows, I wonder, little bubble of unbudded capillaries, little one ever a swirl in my vascular galaxies, what would you think of this world that turns itself steadily into an oblivion that hurts, and hurts bad? Would you curse me, my careless caressing you into this world, or would you rise up and mustering all your strength into that tiny throat that one day, no doubt, would grow big and strong, scream and scream and scream until you break the back of one injustice, or at least get to your knees to kiss back to life some roadkill? I have so many questions for you, for you are closer to me than anyone has ever been, tumbling as you are this second through my heart's every chamber, your teeny mouth singing along with the half-broke workhorse's steady boom and gasp. And since we're talking today, I should tell you, though I know you sneak a peek sometimes through your father's eyes, it's a glorious day. And there are millions of leaves collecting against the curbs. And they're the most delicate shade of gold we've ever seen, and must favor the transparent wings of the angels you're swimming with, little angel. And as to your mother, well, I don't know. But my guess is that lilac bursts from her throat, and she is both honeybee and wasp and some kind of moan to boot, and probably she dances in the morning. But who knows? You'll swim beneath that bridge if it comes. For now, let me tell you about the bush called honeysuckle, that the sad call a weed, and how you could push your little sun-licked face into the throngs and breathe and breathe. Sweetness would be your name, and you would wonder why 4 of your teeth are so sharp and the tiny mountain range of your knuckles so hard. And you would throw back your head and open your mouth at the cows lowing their human songs in the field, and the pigs swimming and shit and clover and everything on this earth, little dreamer of the new world. Holy. Every raindrop and sand grain and blade of grass worthy of love and love and love, tiny shaman, tiny blood thrust, tiny trillion cells trilling and trilling, little dreamer, little hard hat, little heartbeat, little best of me. Um, this one is called Tomato on Board. There it is. Tomato on Board. What you don't know until you carry a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane is that carrying a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane will make people smile at you almost like you're carrying a baby, a quiet baby. I did not know this until today, carrying my little tomato, about 3 or 4 inches high in its 4-inch plastic starter pot, which my friend Michael gave to me, smirking about how I was going to get it home. Something about this at first felt naughty, not comparing a tomato to a baby, but carrying the tomato onto the plane. And so I slid the thing into my bag while going through security, which made them pull the bag for inspection. When the security guy saw it was a tomato, he smiled and said, "I don't know how to check that. Have a good day." But I quickly realized that one of its stems, which I almost wrote as arms, was broken from the jostling, and it only had 4 of them, so I decided I better just carry it out in the open. And the shower of love began. It was a shower of love I also felt while carrying a bouquet of lilies through the streets of Rome last summer. People, maybe women especially, maybe women my age-ish and older especially, smiling with approval. A woman in a house dress beating out a rug on a balcony shouted, "Bravo!" An older couple holding hands both smiled at me and pulled into each other, knitting their fingers together. My showerers might have been disappointed to know I was not giving the lilies to a sweetheart, but to my friends, Damiano and Moira, who had translated a few of my poems into Italian and were so kind as to let me stay at their place a couple nights while I was passing through. On the way to the vegetarian restaurant Damiano's ex-wife owns with her partner, we walked by what I'm pretty sure Damiano said was the biggest redbud tree in the world. It stretched for yards, lounging periodically onto the mossy earth. Its beautiful black bark glistened by the streetlights. Though translation is an act of love, so my showerers needn't be disappointed at all. Before boarding the final leg of my flight, one of the workers said, "Nice tomato," which I don't think was a come on. And the flight attendant asked about the tomato at least 5 times, not an exaggeration, every time calling it my tomato. "Where's my tomato? How's my tomato? You didn't lose my tomato, did you?" She even directed me to an open seat in the exit row. "Why don't you guys go sit there and stretch out?" I gathered my things and set the little guy in the seat next to me so she could look out. When I got my water, I poured some in the little guy's soil. When we got bumpy, I put my hand on the little guy's container, careful not to snap another arm off. And when we landed and the pilot put the brakes on hard, my arm reflexively went across the seat, holding the little guy in place, the way my dad's arm would when he had to brake in that car without seatbelts to speak of, in one of my very favorite gestures in the Encyclopedia of Human Gestures. I think I'm going to read 3 or 4 more things. This poem is called "To the Mulberry Tree," Ode to the Mulberry Tree. To the Mulberry Tree. I got odes in here and I got to those. And I imagine a lot of you know what a mulberry tree is, but a mulberry tree up here is, they grow all over the place and they readily kind of reseed. So they're, in my opinion, they're wonderful that way. They kind of move around. And they make a fruit that favors kind of a blackberry inside in appearance, a little thinner probably. And they're amazing. And birds, I'm a gardener, and birds often choose mulberries over other things, like, you know, your tomatoes or something, or your strawberries. Like if you have a mulberry tree around, that mulberry tree will help you out, you know, in many ways, but that's just one of them. And I'll tell you too, like I once made the mistake of reading, you'll get it, reading this poem to a bunch of like kids, like a K through 12 school, like there were kindergartners in this reading that I gave. Wasn't the worst thing ever, but you'll hear it wasn't the best thing. That's the title of something. Wasn't the worst thing ever. Wasn't the best thing. To the mulberry tree. Everyone knows it's good luck, if inconvenient, when a bird shits on you. When I heard that come out of my mouth with these little kids in this audience, I was like, what am I doing? When a bird shits on you. But even more so, good luck if the bird shits on you when you're plucking gold currant tomatoes sweet enough to make your bare feet lift just so off the ground, and the beetles beneath scurry and giggle. And as I moved to gobble one, mouth agape and swooped in a grin at once, the shit slurries half in and half on my sun-warmed chin, which, forgive me, jiggles me from my reverie, for I'm only human. Swiping the slurp of turd to see from my mouth to see it is mostly purple, the goop seedy and gelatinous. And when I see the bird pitching his swill from the branch above, I know that, yes, this shit is mostly berry from that most prolific of trees, which some numbskulls call a weed because it is so prolific and not, they say, particularly useful. These same some call insipid the mulberry's flavor, which I think means tasteless or bland, but given I can detect swirled in the shit, the sweet of the thing, insipid does not fit the bill, but rather most likely describes the sex life of the describer. But why should I get personal? Just defending a tree's honor. Mostly I'm happy the birds feast on the topmost branches of these tall trees and leave be for the time being my blueberries and soon blackberries and grapes and these little tomatoes. Though to be sure, it is a certain glee as spring gasps into summer and the lowest branches shimmer with their simple booty, which I must jump for, and sometimes high, which I will not probably always be able to do. For jumping and grabbing at once like this, a soft thing is hard. Be gentle, she said, emerging from the dugout beneath the mulberry tree, where the big kids gathered, and we mostly rode our bikes by fast so as not to be snatched to the ground and pummeled, or worse, for they were teenagers. But I knew this early July morning they would be nowhere to be found, and the tree would be burdened with a crop begging to be loosed on my ice cream. She wiped her eyes and yawned and put on glasses, and there was in her hair a small sprig of grass, and she was barefoot, laughing and filling with me slowly my bucket, eating a few when it was full, giggling at the small burst of juice one made on her chin. And behind her, beneath the tree, there was a filthy blanket and a pack of cigarettes and a tinfoil wrapper crumpled and shimmering and the frayed remnants of a rope. And seeing me seeing into the terrible future, she softly put one hand on my chin and the other in my hair and turned my head away from what wreckage waited in there, which too I will do to you, so that none of us ever die terribly, but stay always like this, lips and fingers blushed purple, the faint sugar ghosting our mouths beneath the tree inside me, which is the same tree now grown inside you. All of us snugged in the canopy, on our tippy toes, gathering fruit for good. This is called An Abundance of Public Toilets. Yeah, I think I'll read this and then I'll read one more. An abundance of public toilets. I don't mean this delight to diminish the dignity-violating absence of public toilets, public bathrooms in New York City, which is a failure and a carelessness, a ruthlessness, in fact, which reminds me somehow that ours is a country where property is more valued than people are. Nor do I want this delight, which was occasioned by the lavatorial deprivation New York City is, which every one of you has a friend with a bad story about, to be a delight about deprivation. Though it might be that deprivation and the alleviation or deprivation of deprivation is one of the sources of delight. Source is the wrong word. One of the flashlights upon delight. the unveilers, the ticklers, some word that explains how delight originates in the delighted is what I mean. And it is simply stimulated or awakened. Not too long ago, I was buying some lumber at the local hardware store to build a raised bed. It was summer, melon season, a time of year I tend to be abundantly hydrated. As I was sliding my 2x12s into the car, I realized I really needed to pee, like really, really. But for some reason, I felt shy asking to use the loo. I wanted an espresso anyway, and figured I'd just pull into the bakery around the corner. Except when I got there, all the parking was taken. And now it was bad, real bad. And so I started looking around for abandoned buildings or little clutches of trees where I could take a piss, but had no luck, being more or less downtown. Not to mention the muscles of my mid and lower back were starting to seize up now, thanks to whatever taxing physiological business clamps the urethra shut. I had a friend once who had to pee bad, but being a new guy at a law firm in a meeting that would not stop, he held it for a very long time until the meeting did finally stop. And while removing his member from his slacks at the urinal, he fainted. I will never forget this story. And given as mine is a small town and mine is a public occupation, I thought better of pulling into the parking lot next to the family video and letting loose against the wall in full view of everyone on Grimes Street. One of them, of course, an old student of mine who got a C-, capturing my indecent drainage for future upload. I chose instead to pee my pants in my car. I peed and peed in my pants, my shorts in my car. And then I peed some more. The word chose there made the not exactly accident seem more volitional than it really was, though driving while in a bathroom panic is unsafe. And so I approve of my choice for that reason too. Regardless, the delight of the car peeing was in the alleviation of the mental and physical anguish of holding the pee in. It was a deprivation of a deprivation. And the delight, for it was a delight as the vinyl seats of my Subaru became a pool of well-hydrated urine, would not have occurred had the original deprivation, having to pee and nowhere to do it, not occurred. Yeah, some shame and such. This essay is helping me to work it out. I fully understand that this delight, and what is coming to look like an appeal to you to view it as such, might not be a delight to you. Delight is like that. All the same, it seems illuminating. And so it was that when I was in Greenwich Village, again well hydrated, but this time from coffee, without a bathroom, and I asked the barista where he might urinate if he couldn't pee in the place where he just spent $4.50 for a short fucking Americano. He pointed to the park across the street, which had a porta potty. When I entered, I found that it was a very clean porta potty. And urinating, I noticed for the first time, standing up and kind of tall like I am, that the tops of porta potties have screens that you can look out of, which I did. Like I was in a confessional, like I was a priest, watching the parishioners walk by as the noon bells to the nearby church started to ring. And let me just finish with a poem here. Here's a flow poem called Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands. Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands. Which today in the garden, I'd forgotten. Let's start again. Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands. Which today in the garden, I'd forgotten I'd known, and more forgotten I'd learned and was taught this by my grandfather, who, in the midst of arranging and watering the small bouquets on mostly the freshest graves, saw my thirst and cranked the big red rusty pump, bringing forth from what sounded like the gravelly throat of an animal a frigid torrent, and with his hands made a lagoon from which he drank and then I drank before he cranked again, making of my hands now a fountain in which I can see the silty bottom drifting while I drink and drink And my grandfather waters the flowers on the graves, among which are his and his wife's, unfinished and patient, glistening after he rinses the bird shit from his wife's, and the pump exhales, and I drink to the bottom of my fountain and join him in his work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. That was fantastic. And I enjoyed it so much. And it was so great to get to hear you read the poems and the essays, kind of side by side. And just to hear them in your voice. So thank you. That was just such it was a delight. And I recognize that like probably you get that a lot.
Time to
really
time.
was. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I think we're going to have some questions for you. I know I'm going to start seeing those in the chat here in a minute, but as we're waiting for those to come in, I had a question for you that I was hoping maybe you could start with. When you were talking about the 3 requirements you had set for yourself in writing the Book of Delights, I was thinking about your requirement to write by hand. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that does for you as a writer. Do you tend to write most of your stuff by hand, or do you go back and forth, or what was it about making that conscious choice? What did that do for you?
I think like after a while of doing it, I realized that there was a kind of thinking that I could do when I was writing by hand. And that sounds a little bit weird. I mean, it might sound particularly weird for folks who primarily, this is me typing. It might sound particularly weird for people who almost entirely have done their writing on a keyboard or something. But it is really important to me. I'm actually writing Delights again right now, like another kind of year-long project. And periodically I'll be like, for whatever reason, I'll want to do it. I'll want to type it. And I realized there's a kind of fluidity of thought that happens when I'm writing by hand that the computer doesn't allow for. And I think, I have an essay in there where I sort of talk about it, but I think partly what it is that the delete button is a really seductive thing. And the time pressure when it's just your hand and the only kind of tool you have to eliminate a thought is like a scratch out so that it stays there, so that the residue of your thinking stays there. That feels really important to me. And there is something also about that when you're writing by hand, when I'm writing by hand, I feel less compelled actually to correct things because the tools of correction are less prominent. Like I can't disappear my thinking. So in a way, I think more interestingly by hand. The other thing that's also just like, because I gave myself the daily task of it, then if I have a notebook, like I always have a notebook in my pocket and a pen, I'm sort of always ready to write. I'm always ready. So that's another important part of it. And I'm realizing that now again, because I'm writing them again and it's over halfway done. And I'm writing them in grade books, like university grade books. And because, I give everyone A's, so I don't have to use them for anything else. So but they're a little bit too big for my pockets. And I do find that that's like a little bit of periodically I'll have like, I'll take one of these little ones and then I'll transcribe it into the bigger one. But yeah, I could talk about that for a while.
Yeah, no, I love that. I also have like the little tiny ones, then like the mid-sized ones, and you've got to have the ones that fit in the right places. But I mean, for me, my handwriting is really bad. So I type better than I write, but I wish I'd like to write by hand, but I'm just not, my handwriting is really bad, but I love that. I wrote down the residue of your thinking. I think that's such a great, I love that phrase. It's great. So I'm starting to get some questions coming in here. And just a reminder for everybody watching on Facebook, if you do have questions, go ahead and put those in the comments there on Facebook and they will be relayed to me. So here's a question from somebody who is watching us. Do you think being a poet makes you more aware of being alive, makes things taste better or hurt sharper? I ask because your words are so precise. Do you recommend living this way? It's a big question.
I don't think that it's any kind of special thing that poets have. I don't think that. But I do think there's this thing, and it was kind of taught to me by this kid. I was doing a little Zoom thing with these kids at a high school in Philadelphia. And I read a couple of these delights, and this kid said to me, you seem like you have a really eventful life. And I said, I really don't think I do. I think I describe my life well. And I sort of feel like that's kind of the question, like that, I would offer that as a kind of response to the question, like, what does it mean to describe our lives well? Or what does it mean to cultivate the practices by which we understand and we're able to sort of notice our lives well? That feels to me worthwhile. I don't think it's at all like the sort of sole bastion or whatever province of like poets or writers or anyone to do that. Obviously, there's all kinds of people who are constantly just notice things, you know, and I'm reading this book called Mushroom at the End of the World by this writer named Anna Singh, Tsing. And she, a couple of times she has this phrase, it's about kind of this kind of mushroom, and she's out there like looking for it and thinking about it. But this phrase, and it's the arts of noticing, you know. And if you're someone who spends a lot of time in the woods looking for mushrooms, you probably have really special eyes for something, you know. Or if you're someone who is a DJ and you got to find the right records, you're probably good at, you know, or whatever the million, you know, if you're a gardener, you know, you might have certain eyes for certain things. And I don't know if it, you know, a way to live. I think noticing makes sense. but I mean, I think it makes good sense. It also feels to me kind of a happy state of or maybe happy is maybe the wrong word, joyful. It feels like kind of a full, and that question, the kind of little hinge on that question you said, something along the lines of like being able to sort of fully inhabit one's, you didn't quite put it like this, but you put it very eloquently, like being able to fully inhabit one's, say, delight, but also one's sorrow, and to not distinguish them from each other, but realize that they're kind of mutually, they exist together, which to me is like getting toward a definition of joy. So, you know, it seems like a reasonable practice or endeavor.
Yeah, thank you. Here's one that I think is really interesting. It kind of connects to maybe what you were just saying. Leandra says, I was inspired by the Book of Delights to try to write my own delights daily, but I found it challenging some days. Did you ever struggle to identify a delight, or did it get easier over time?
Over time, it got easier. It just got easier. Yeah. It's just like, and eventually, and I've been thinking about this because so I wrote these from, you know, August 1st, 2016 to August 1st, 2017. So it's 5.5 years ago. And then as I'm writing them now, I've been noticing a couple of things. One is that, like, from the last project, I just kind of, I turned on the radar or whatever, and boom. So I can just start to do it, you know, like if I, you know, I can just like, it wouldn't be hard for me to find, I'm in my kitchen, it wouldn't be hard for me to find things that I could kind of wonder about, like that kind of delight me, and that delight me in surprising ways, you know, that I could really wonder about. But the other thing that I found that, and this feels important, and now to go back to that previous question, I think noticing is absolutely vital. Yeah, I was sort of like not wanting to, I don't like to give advice or to, you know, like, I know. Like life advice, but I'm kind of like, yeah, it is. Like one of, I think like to feel like we're having meaningful lives is to sort of be able to witness the connection between ourselves and all. So like that the bird song is actually connected to me, so that the way that the wisteria is growing is actually connected to me, so that the kids playing on the playground down near the school, it's actually connected to me, and be able to notice them as opposed to just noticing, you know, the turmoil or what's on the news or whatever. I feel like that those arts of noticing are crucial. But, and then to come back to this thing, I realized while writing these delights that as I'm writing these delights, these are things that before they could have happened to me, but I would not have acknowledged them as things that delight me. I would have just acknowledged them as like a neat thing that happened. Like, oh, I like it. Oh, I had a sweet time. Like I was in the coffee shop and this kid wanted to give me a high five. She thought I was doing my homework, you know? And that's like, that was a sweet event. But then I'm like, oh, well, I think I actually I love like very clearly, you know, sweet public interactions with people. I
Yeah.
just love that. What do I love about that? And then I start to then boom, I have this reservoir of, what do you ever call it? What reservoir of delight. Now I know that delightful thing just happened to me. Or like, and that feels like a kind of special thing to be walking down the street and to be like, oh, there's one of the things that I delight. Whereas before you might have passed the thing and not registered it. Because of course, partly I think the thing is that we're not everyone, of course, but I think maybe more people I know aren't good at being like, that's something I really don't like. That's something I really don't like. That's something I really don't like. It's just like, all right, but what do you like? Yeah.
Right. No, you're right. Cause I'm thinking like we have the phrase pet peeve, like what's your pet peeve? But what's your pet delight, right? Like
Totally.
I love that way of thinking about it. That's great. Well, connected to that, there's another question that's come in. Let me scroll to it because it connects to what you were just saying. Lydia said, can you talk about some recent human interactions or gestures that have brought you delight and words that they bring to mind for you?
I was just teaching a class today, and we were sitting outside. It was a really beautiful day here. And oh God, I just love these people so much. I'm actually sitting in and teaching someone else's class. And I think, Katie, I mentioned this earlier today, like we do this class, I'd like to do weird stuff. And these kids just were like, I came in, they didn't know me. And I was like, we're gonna do an opera today, like easy 1 minute opera. Then the next class, I'm like, okay, 3 minute opera. Here's a couple constraints. And then today, so this is my third week with them or something. And now, I told them they got to bring in puppets. And then on Thursday, we'll do this last opera. And then I don't get them anymore. But today was so nice out. I said, let's just sit outside and talk with each other. And by the end of the thing, the ways that they were, like one kid didn't know how to cook. It was like the one kid said, like, I try to cook and like it'll be 1 out of 5 times. Like I put all the same stuff in there, but 1 out of 5 times it's good and blah, blah, blah. And then so other people are like advising this kid. I'm like, oh, and this is how I do it. This is how my mom does it. Oh yeah, this is how my cousin does it. Blah, blah, blah. And it was so endearing. And by the end of it, they're like talking about different places in town that they like to eat. And they're like, why don't we have what do you call it? We gotta have a group chat. We gotta go as a group to go to like the ramen place. like the little ways that people listen to each other when I'm in groups, period. But like, there is this thing, and this is a thing that's been like really moving to me lately, is the affirmation that young people give to each other.
Yeah.
Many forms of that. Like sometimes when they clap, like I like when I do poems with young people, kids, everyone, I like it to clap when someone's done. But also like that kind of thing, like when someone wants to figure out how to cook something and then people are like, yeah, that's hard. And then let me help you. Oh, I love it. Yeah.
That's so good. I love that. No, there's something so wonderful about that. And I love that they were going to help this kid cook. I mean, I feel like I need that also. I'm about like 1 out of every 5 times is like, that's my best option for cooking.
Yeah.
I don't do the cooking in my family. Not usually. Okay. So I have another question here. Cordarius said, I'm inspired by your surrealistic or imagistic style of portraying life. When you write, how is your process of balancing deeper meaning or intention and colorful language without convoluting the work for your readers?
That's great. That's so great. And
I'll add to that for a second too, because this is something, so Derry, who asked this question, is in the intermediate poetry class that I'm teaching right now. Okay. And one thing we were talking about in that class is the way that you are able to kind of write these incredibly long, complex sentences and play on the page, over multiple pages. You can sustain sort of like a syntactical idea. You can sustain the syntax over a really long period of time and go into these totally different anecdotes and associative moments and images, but you can follow it all and you can stay rooted in it and anchored in it. And which I think is, I mean, we were talking in class the other day about how that's a pretty amazing feat to be able to pull off. And of course it feels effortless when we read it, because whenever you watch somebody who's really good at something, it seems effortless. But yeah, I mean, I think I want to try to piggyback on Barry's question a little bit too, because I'm also really interested in that. So yeah, what
Yeah.
is your process for that?
Well, yeah, I feel like one is that there is a way of thinking and conversing that I am really interested in. And it's like a digressive mode, you know. And then so one thing I'll say is that there are a lot of writers who have been very important to me, like Gerald Stern and Larry Levis and Bridget Picking Kelly, like these people who they take off and kind of come back, and who have meant a lot to me, and who kind of, I think, have taught me how to imagine those things. There's another person named John Coltrane. And, you know, I was sitting with a buddy of mine recently, and he was saying how every single day when he was growing up, his dad played My Favorite Things every morning when he was staying with him. And I said, oh, was it this studio one or one of the live ones? And he said, no, it's just the record. And I was like, oh my God, you don't know what the live ones are, because the live ones, he can take off, go all the way to the moon and come back. And then, you know, and you're like, what would you just do? It's wild, you know? And I just love that. I adore it. And I also love an architectural feature called the cantilever, you know, which is that kind of like part of the, if I'm explaining it right, it's like the kind of part of a jutting of a building that stretches out, that'll hang and overhang. And like Frank Lloyd Wright, he wanted to make that really long, and some of his buildings fail. They start to collapse because he wanted to do it. But I love the idea of that. How far can a kind of thought go before it'll collapse, and you can't bring it back without, you know, being, I don't know, just off in a certain kind of way. That's all to say, I work hard at it, and I try to think how far I can go. While there is this thing that is like when I revise, because that question also about like the sort of the imagery, a certain kind of what I would call precision of language that I'm always trying to get a certain kind of precision of language, and a kind of precision of language that gets as close to articulating a kind of feeling or sentiment for me that then I hope will be communicable to a reader in some way. So, and one of the barometers for that, for it being good enough for me, one of the barometers is like, is it true? Yeah. And, you know, and if something's just pretty for pretty's sake, that doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean it's not true. But in the context of a poem, it's kind of like, is this just flourish, or is this flourish that is doing something that needs to happen? Even as I say it, I feel like I can't have a rule about it, but there is some knowing that the poem gives, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a beautiful question, because I could kind of talk around it for, you know, the rest of my life.
Yeah, no, well, and I think we probably have time for one more question here before we wrap up. And the question that I'd like to read is one that connects again to what you were just talking about with the idea of truth. This is from John. I noticed many of your poems contain a sort of storytelling element. Your essays also seem to recount experiences. What is the intersection of fiction or storytelling with poetry in your work? Does story matter in your poetry and essays, or does a truth or message grounded in reality matter more?
Yeah, you know, story matters a ton to me. And it's funny. It's taken me a little while to sort of be able to say that, you know, because I almost feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, Katie, because I feel we're in the same kind of, you know, coming up together. And like it feels like there have been times in my life, for whatever reason, I felt a little bit shy to say that, no, this poem is from a story in my life. This is, and it happened to me, and now I'm gonna like do some poem thing with it, you know. And And I've been shy about that, but that's always, I mean, it's very often the case. Sometimes there are other things going on that are like just a different situation, but story, and in particular story, like stories that I've experienced, are fundamental, central to the way that I compose. Now, that second part of that question is really, really great, because it's sort of like the question about, as I hear it, what is more important, the kind of truth of the story, or the truth of the event, or the truth of the event, et cetera. And I don't feel a particular loyalty to what we would call the truth, usually when making a poem or an essay. There will be times when I'm absolutely going to be loyal to the so-called truth, but then there will be times for sure where things are just going to get a little skewed because I need the piece to do what it needs to do. And I think that could probably be, in terms of meaning, I need to sort of arrive at something that, like, something has to be left out, but I think it could also be something just like music, like it just doesn't fit the music of the piece, you know? So yeah, that's another good question. If you're for the two people who asked, if you're in the class tomorrow, maybe we could talk about that more.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a big question, right? And I think it's something that everybody who writes is wrestling with in some way. Like, what's the allegiance to the factual truth versus, was it Tim O'Brien called it story truth versus happening truth, right? Like, which one is it? So, and there's one more question that has popped up here from Dan, who says, wait, I have to find out how his tomato seedlings are doing. So before we go, can you just update us on the status of the tomato seedlings?
The seedlings, that was a couple of years ago, but they did a lot. They gave us a lot of fruit. I mean, they were late blooming, but they made so much fruit. It was kind of a paste, like a Sicilian paste tomato. Oh my God, it was an amazing plant that Michael Collier gave me. Is very lucky. Yeah, sweet.
Sounds so good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Ross. I mean, this has been so fantastic, and thank you to everybody who's watching, who has been putting questions in the chat and asking such great things. And thank you for just reading your work and being with us this whole week. I mean, we're thrilled that we get to have you with us virtually throughout the week. So we're looking forward to all kinds of other fantastic things. And just a reminder to everyone who is watching, if you could please fill out the survey that is there on Facebook so that we can report back with your thoughts about everything. That'll be great. And yeah, that's what we have. So I just want to thank you again so much, Ross Gay, for joining us tonight. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Have a great night, everybody.